Good evening, one and all present over here, respected seniors and my friends. On behalf of Durg Pillai Academy of Pediatrics, I welcome you all in today's academic session. This digital platform we have got today is by courtesy of Central IAP. So firstly, I would like to thank our Central IAP President, Dr. Bakul Parekh sir, and our IAP Secretary, Dr. Basivraj sir, who has been kind and considerate enough to have offered us this digital platform for a noble cause of learning. Thank you very much, sir. I thank Mr. Jensen, Mr. Thomas, Manisha on behalf of the IAP, on behalf of Durg Academy of Pediatrics for coordinating these events from DIAP, with DIAP. I would like to welcome our guest speakers. Right now, Dr. Hans has joined. We are awaiting Dr. Dheeraj Gupta sir to join shortly. I welcome our panelist, Dr. Satyen Gyani sir. He's our central representative for state. Again, he's an intensivist and expert in allergic disorder. Dr. Satyen Gyani sir has joined. Is he there? Yeah, he is there. Yeah. Hello, sir. I would like to welcome Dr. Harish Naik sir, CGAP President, Dr. Raghavendra sir, Chhattisgarh Academy of Pediatrics Secretary. I think they have not joined, they have yet to join. Dr. Amar Singh Thakur sir, Dr. Anup Verma sir. Sir, you are there? Anup Verma sir?
Very well, we are joined very early.
Yeah, Anup Verma sir is very well known for his active contribution in CIAP module and clinical clues. We have Dr. Ashwini Agarwal sir with us, Dr. Sarabhai sir. I think Dr. Sawant sir has joined. No, he hasn't joined yet, I feel. Dr. Kishore Kaushik sir. All are our senior pediatricians from Chhattisgarh state with national repute. Of course, our President Dr. N.S. Thakur sir's guidance and motivation has led to all these events possible. My friends, as you all know that today is 5th September, celebrated all over as Teachers' Day. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude, respect, and thanks to my learned seniors, my teachers, and my parents who have contributed to my understanding and knowledge, not only now, but since childhood. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker, just 1 minute, I'm just details I'm finding out. I would like to call upon our first speaker, Dr. Hans Wesch, who is a young, dynamic, and vibrant pediatrician. He is from Maulana Azad Medical College. He is MD Pediatrics from Kalavati Siran Children's Hospital. He is a fellow in pediatric intensive care from Sir Gangaram Hospital. Presently, he is working as a consultant pediatrician and intensivist at Meher Hospital, Dehradun. May I now invite Dr. Hans for his deliberation on pediatric anaphylaxis. And today I would like to tell you that on occasion of Teachers' Day, we have two speakers who are interrelated to each other as a teacher-student relationship. I would now like to invite Dr. Hans for his deliberation. Dr. Hans, please.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's really, I'm really honored to present my slides in front of in front of Dr. Seema and others. Can I start sharing my screen?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Are my slides visible?
Yeah, they're visible.
Okay, ma'am. So before I start my slides, I would like to wish all my teachers a very happy Teachers' Day. And we are living in a digital age now that we are getting used to webinars. Before that, we had ebooks, PDFs. Everything digital is available these days. But I would like to say that we cannot. That clinical bedside teaching is irreplaceable. So I would take this opportunity to thank all my teachers from the core of my heart for teaching whatever and details they have given me, whatever knowledge they have imparted me. Thank you so much for that. So let's begin. So I'm going to talk about pediatric anaphylaxis. So coming to the definition, anaphylaxis is defined as a severe life-threatening or generalized systemic hypersensitivity reaction. They are generally type 1 hypersensitivity reactions, and they are generally IgE mediated by IgE antibodies. There are sometimes there are even non-IgE mediated reactions. They are generally less severe and are referred to as anaphylactoid reactions. This is a figure which shows the pathophysiology of an anaphylactic reaction in brief. So on initial exposure to the antigen, the B cells stimulate the plasma cells to produce IgE antibodies. These IgE antibodies occupy the Fc fragment of the mast cells and the basophils. When there is a repeated exposure of the same antigen, there is cross bridging between the IgE antibodies, which in turn stimulates degranulation of the mast cells and the basophils. The degranulation of the mast cells and basophils leads to release of a lot of chemicals such as histamines, kinins, serotonins, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, platelet activating factors, eosinophilic chemotactic factors. These are all the enzymes that are responsible for the symptoms of an anaphylactic reaction. That is, there will be leaky blood vessels, the trachea will undergo bronchoconstriction. These enzymes will further attract more and more basophils and mast cells to cause more degranulation, thus intensifying the anaphylactic reaction. This figure shows the IgE and the non-IgE dependent pathway for anaphylaxis. As we've already discussed the IgE dependent pathway, I will discuss briefly about the non-IgE dependent pathway. This can be seen in cases wherein there is some amount of drug exposure. These drugs include aspirin, NSAIDs. Sometimes radiocontrast agents can also lead to these reactions. Sometimes giving IV vancomycin and IV opiates can also stimulate this pathway. In this non-IgE dependent pathway, basically the mast cells and the basophils do not degranulate with the help of IgE antibodies. The mast cells and the basophils degranulate automatically on exposure to these agents. The exact pathway is very tough, and it is beyond the scope of my talk. So I will basically concentrate more on the IgE dependent pathway of anaphylaxis. So is just an urticarial reaction or small hives in the skin, does that count as anaphylaxis? No, just simple urticaria in the child will not be called anaphylaxis. There is a particular diagnostic criteria for anaphylaxis which has to be fulfilled before we label the child as having an anaphylactic reaction. So the diagnostic criteria is as follows. Anaphylaxis is highly likely when one of the following three criteria is fulfilled. The first criteria is it has to be at an acute onset of illness within minutes to hours with involvement of the skin, mucosal tissue, or both in the form of hives, pruritus, flushing, swollen lips, tongue, and uvula, along with involvement of either the respiratory symptoms such as dyspnea, wheezing, bronchospasm, stridor, hypoxia, or cardiovascular symptoms in the form of hypotonia, collapse, syncope, or incontinence. Second criteria is two or following that occur rapidly after exposure to a likely allergen for that patient, with symptoms such as involving the skin, respiratory symptoms, or cardiovascular symptoms, or GIT symptoms. So we need to have at least two of these following four symptoms. The third criteria is reduction in BP after exposure to a known allergen for that patient within minutes to several hours. So the third criteria says that if there is a sudden fall in BP, sudden hypotension for that particular age, it comes under anaphylactic reaction. So just having an urticaria will not be labeled as anaphylaxis. We need to make sure that it falls under any of these three criteria to be labeled as an anaphylactic reaction. I'd recommend we can take a screenshot if people are interested. They can take a screenshot of this slide, so I can wait for some time and move forward. Coming to the symptoms, involving the skin are pruritus, flushing, urticaria, angioedema, and watering from the eyes. The cardiovascular symptoms include sudden hypotension, shock, arrhythmias, bradycardia, tachycardia, and it may also involve sudden cardiac arrest. Respiratory symptoms include stridor, dyspnea, and wheezing. And GIT symptoms include vomiting, diarrhea, or a crampy abdominal pain. CNS symptoms include sudden confusion, loss of consciousness, or a feeling of impending doom. So this picture shows a very good graphical representation of all the symptoms that might be seen during an anaphylactic reaction. Coming to the etiology of anaphylaxis, the most common etiology leading to allergic reactions in children is food allergy. It constitutes around 56% of the causes of allergy. Of these, the most common include peanuts, milk, protein, reaction to fish, or reaction to tree nuts. The second in line are the drug allergies, and the most common of them are due to beta-lactams, penicillin, and muscle relaxants. We might also see anaphylaxis after an insect bite or bite from bees. We can also see latex allergies. In certain cases, there are also exercise-induced anaphylaxis. In cases where we cannot find the etiology of the anaphylaxis, we label them as idiopathic anaphylaxis. In the management will be divided in three categories. First, we learn how to manage the acute episode. After management of the acute episode, the child has to undergo an allergy assessment to identify which allergen the child is allergic to. And third, we'll discuss the community strategies in order to prevent the recurrence of such a repeated anaphylactic reaction. So coming to the management of acute episode, as the slide is itself shouting epinephrine, epinephrine, epinephrine. So yes, the treatment of anaphylaxis is epinephrine. Epinephrine acts on three receptors: the alpha receptor, the beta 1 receptor, and the beta 2 receptor. On acting on the alpha receptors, it increases the peripheral vascular resistance, it increases the blood pressure, and it decreases the coronary artery perfusion, and also decreases the angioedema and urticaria. On acting on the beta 1 receptors, it increases the heart rate and improves the contractility of the heart. On the beta 2 receptors, it mediates the bronchodilation of the trachea and inhibits the release of inflammatory mediators from the mast cells and the basophils. So epinephrine basically acts on all these three receptors simultaneously in order to treat the anaphylaxis. Epinephrine is given in the dilution of 1:1000. The preferred route is intramuscular, preferably on the lateral side of the thigh, that is the vastus lateralis. We have to give a deep intramuscular injection of epinephrine in the dose of 0.01 ml per kg per dose. At a time, we can give a maximum dose of 0.5 milligram. It is a very safe drug for anaphylaxis. There are generally no contraindications, and we can give a repeat dose of intramuscular epinephrine within 5 to 10 minutes if there is no response to the first dose of epinephrine. So this is a very interesting graph which shows the time to Cmax with the different routes of epinephrine. So basically, time to Cmax refers to the time taken by the drug to reach the maximum concentration in the blood. So here we see in the intramuscular route, the time to Cmax is around 8 to 10 minutes. Whereas in the subcutaneous route, the time to Cmax is 34 minutes. So since anaphylaxis is an emergency, we have to choose the route which is the fastest. So this proves that intramuscular epinephrine is the best route for giving epinephrine. IV route is unsafe as it might lead to arrhythmias and hypertension, and it has to be avoided. If IV route is to be given, it is preferred to give it in an infusion form. We can give it an infusion of epinephrine in the rate of 0.1 to 0.5 microgram per kg per minute. but bolus doses of IV epinephrine are to be avoided to prevent the side effects. Other things that are to be done immediately are, we have to remove the causative allergen if possible. For example, if the child is receiving a drug that has led to the anaphylactic reaction, we have to stop that drug immediately. If there is a bee sting which is visible on the skin, we have to remove that bee sting, and we can also apply ice immediately to prevent the absorption of that allergen in the body. If we are not in a hospital setting, we have to call for help. Intramuscular injection of epinephrine is given at the earliest opportunity, followed by additional epinephrine if required, if there is no response to the first dose of epinephrine. The patient is placed in a supine position with the lower extremities elevated. What this will do is, this will improve the circulation in all the vital organs, and it also improves the blood flow back to the heart, which will improve the contractility of the heart. Supplemental oxygen, humidified high flow oxygen is to be given. It is given by a non-rebreathing mask to give high flows of oxygen at around 10 to 15 liters per minute. If the patient is hypovolemic, we need to secure a good IV cannula in a good vein for giving IV fluids and fluid boluses. So the management of the child in an anaphylactic reaction has to be done in an intensive care unit. The child has to be hooked on to a monitor to monitor all the vitals such as heart rate, saturation, the blood pressure. The second figure shows how the legs of the patient have to be elevated to improve the circulation to the vital organs. We have to be ready to intubate and start ventilating if required. This is the non-rebreathing mask which provides humidified oxygen at high rates. And we also need to obtain an good IV access to give fluids and fluid boluses, and also to start vasopressor infusion if required. So coming to the supportive medications, before I start with that, I would like to point that these are just supportive medications. They will not reverse the hypotension. They will not reverse the leaky vessels. They will not reverse the bronchoconstriction. The only medication that will reverse that is epinephrine. So supportive medication should not be given priority. Like when we get a child in emergency, we are in a hurry to give steroids and AVIL injection. That is to be avoided. We have to keep in mind that epinephrine is the drug of choice for this. Antihistaminics only relieves the itching and urticaria. We prefer second generation antihistaminics because they are less sedative and do not cross the blood-brain barrier. Corticosteroids that can be used include methylprednisolone and hydrocortisone. Beta-2 agonist can be given in nebulized form to relieve the bronchoconstriction. And we prefer to give humidified high flow oxygen via a non-rebreathing mask. So this is a protocol for the management of anaphylaxis. It is a very busy slide, but I will break it down according to the symptom. If the candidates are interested, they can take a screenshot of this slide. This is a very important slide. After evaluating the airway, breathing, and circulation, when we are sure that the child is in an anaphylactic reaction, we have to be very prompt in giving the first dose of intramuscular adrenaline. If the child is in cardiac arrest, we have to follow the protocol for cardiac arrest. And now I will discuss how to manage the other symptoms after giving the first dose of epinephrine. So management of hypotension. First of all, obviously we have to start high flow oxygen. After securing a good cannula or a central line, we have to give IV fluid boluses. We can start with 20 ml per kg. This is to be given over 10 to 15 minutes. If there is no response, we can even give a second bolus of 20 ml per kg. If there is no response to fluid boluses, we can give supportive medications, which I have discussed, which include the antihistaminics and the steroids. If at this stage there is no response, we can give a repeat dose of intramuscular epinephrine. And if there is further no response, now we have to start thinking in terms of starting an infusion of epinephrine at low rates, 0.1 to 0.5 microgram per kg per minute. And at this stage, we also have to start to think about ventilating and intubating and ventilating the child. To manage the stridor, we have to give humidified high flow oxygen, and we have to make sure that the oxygen has laminar flows. We can give continuous nebulization with epinephrine. We prefer to give 1:1000 dilution of epinephrine in the dose of 0.5 ml per kg up to maximum of 5 ml. continuous epinephrine nebulization will decrease the edema of the laryngeal mucosa and help to relieve stridor. If there is no relief with the nebulization, we can give a repeat dose of epinephrine and also start the supportive medication. Point here to note is that the steroid for choice in stridor is dexamethasone. We can give a start dose of 0.6 mg per kg for stridor, and here also we have to be ready to intubate and start ventilating. To manage the wheeze, obviously we have to start oxygen and beta 2 agonist in the nebulized form, which will cause the bronchodilation. If no response, we can give a repeated second dose of intramuscular epinephrine and also start antihistaminics and steroids. Children with respiratory symptoms should be observed for at least 6 to 8 hours in the hospital prior to discharge after the anaphylactic reaction has settled down. And those children who presented with hypotension and collapse should be at least observed for 24 hours in the intensive care unit. So prior to discharge, there are certain points that are to be kept in mind. The child has to be provided with a self-injectable adrenaline device with all proper instructions which are given to the child as well as the caretakers of the child. Oral antihistaminics and prednisolone is to be prescribed, which is to be given for 3 days. We have to give a proper discharge letter which can be shown to the family physician of the child, and the child has to be ideally referred to an allergy specialist for a proper allergy assessment. So there is quite a lot of work before we discharge the patient from the ICU, especially the child who has presented to us with an anaphylactic reaction. After the discharge, the child has to be referred to a pediatric allergy clinic for a diagnostic assessment of the allergy. Here, the clinical history is of key part as it helps to analyze what allergen led to the anaphylactic reaction. It is important to analyze the labels from any food ingested 2 hours prior to the reaction. We also have to focus on any prior stings that might have taken place to the child when the child was roaming around in the garden or something. We also have to elicit history about contact with latex. Also, there might be history of exercise before that anaphylactic reaction. Coming to diagnostic tests, anaphylaxis is basically a clinical diagnosis. However, there are certain tests that we can do to diagnose anaphylaxis. We can do a serum tryptase level. Serum tryptase is basically an enzyme which is released by the mast cells and the basophils. So the levels of tryptase will be elevated at the time of anaphylaxis for around 6 hours, and which gradually wane with time. The levels generally more than 15 nanogram per ml are considered to be diagnostic for anaphylaxis. Post management of the anaphylaxis, we can do a skin prick test to basically identify the allergen to which the child is allergic to. We can also do serum Ig levels to detect the levels of Ig in the child. So after management, it is very important that the child does not have a repeat episode of anaphylaxis. So prevention of recurrence of this anaphylactic reaction is very important. The physician should teach the patient about the risk of future anaphylaxis as well as the benefits of avoiding measures. Patients should be advised to avoid wearing bright clothes or consuming sweet foods or drinks out of doors, as these will attract a lot of insects. Patients and parents should be informed about the possibility of an allergic reaction after ingestion, contact, or inhalation of a food allergen. The drug allergic child must avoid the specific medication or other compounds which have been found to cause anaphylaxis in the child. And precautions should be taken when using latex in a patient who is undergoing surgical or dental procedure in patients who are sensitive to latex. In patients with history of asthma and food allergies, we have to be very careful because they are generally prone to repeated episodes of anaphylaxis, and we have to be extra careful with such patients. Where a particular food or group of foods has been identified by association in the so-called food-dependent exercise-induced anaphylaxis, the specific foods should be avoided for at least 4 hours prior to exercise. This is important in cases of for children who are into athletics and in heavy exercises. So after the allergy assessment, we have to make sure that we also follow the community strategies. There has to be a very good communication between the allergist, the emergency department, and the family physician. The family physician should be prompt in detecting the signs and symptoms of food allergy in the child. and the physician should actively participate in programs that teach as to how to recognize anaphylaxis and how to treat anaphylaxis. Other healthcare professionals should also be involved with us in the network, and these include the nurses and the pharmacists. There has to be a collaborative partnership among the school staff, the medical professionals, and the community health organizations. The school staff must be notified about the child who is at the risk of anaphylaxis, and all the school staff members should be well trained beforehand to manage anaphylaxis. The emergency kit and management plan should be known to each member of the staff, and there should be periodic checks on the availability of the epinephrine injection and whether they are expired or not. It is very important that the infirmary is always equipped with an epinephrine injection in case there is a child with an anaphylactic reaction. A small word on epinephrine auto injection. Unfortunately, this Anapen and EpiPen, they are not readily available in our country, and they have to be imported and at a very heavy cost. So they are actually available in two quantities, two strengths, 0.3 mg for children who are more than 30 kgs and 0.15 mg who are for children between 15 to 30 kgs of weight. But what do we do in small setting in a clinical practice when we don't have epinephrine auto injection? What we can do is we can give the children a pre-filled epinephrine syringes. We can either use 1 ml or a 2 ml syringe, and according to the weight, we can fill the epinephrine and give it to the patients. We have to cover this epinephrine syringe with a black cover because epinephrine undergoes rapid degradation under direct sunlight. And we have to give 3 syringes to the child. One the child can keep in the backpack, and that is in the bag, school bag. The second one that can be kept at home, and the third one is to be given in the infirmary at the school. So the child is very well covered. If the child has an anaphylactic reaction, that epinephrine pen is readily available. This epinephrine pen can be stored for around 1 month even at room temperature. So it is better to give it, make a epinephrine, fill a syringe with epinephrine and give it to the patient. This is a very good practice that I feel we can follow. This is an allergy and anaphylaxis emergency plan. I've taken this out of American Academy of Pediatrics, but I feel all of us clinicians can make a performa wherein we can fill the details, and it has all the symptoms and all the treatment that can be given. It can be handed out to our allergic patients in case they have an anaphylactic reaction. It is very easy to read. Any layman can read and give treatment in case the child has an anaphylaxis. So coming to the key messages, intramuscular epinephrine is the cornerstone of treating anaphylactic reaction. Each child with a history of a previous allergic reaction to food or an allergen should have a proper risk assessment to identify whether they are at risk of future anaphylaxis. Previous anaphylactic reactions and coexisting persistent asthma are indicators of a higher risk of severe anaphylactic reaction. Other risk factors to consider are reaction to small amounts of allergen, including airborne allergen, cutaneous contact, or previous mild reaction to peanut or tree nut, or if there's a long distance from the emergency medical care, or if the child is a teenager. Prescription of self-injectable epinephrine is mandatory for high-risk subjects. An individualized management plan and education of all the child's caregivers is essential to prevent the recurrence of an anaphylactic reaction. Thank you so much. I hope I've justified in a small presentation about anaphylaxis, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Hans Vesh. I would now request our panelists if there is any question from their side we can put on. Dr. Sarabhai, sir. Dr. Anup.
I think the things were explained beautifully in a very short time. Beautifully explained. So, and whatever the question was there, he asked it even before we started the lecture.
Hey, Dr. Vesh,
we can repeat the questions for our viewers. There will be a lot of viewers who have joined late, so we can repeat the question.
नहीं, just one question, Dr. Vesh, ki, what will be your advice for a general pediatric clinic, especially the vaccination clinic, which is very important part of a pediatrician, to keep
Yes.
adrenaline along for what will be your advice? How to have adrenaline, and but you have said that adrenaline pen is available. What will be the cost of this? And what will be your advice for a lay pediatrician?
For clinic-based practice, I feel that vaccination can lead to sometimes anaphylactic reactions, and we have to have our epinephrine pens and epinephrine injections ready in our vaccination clinics. And I also feel that this has become a medical legal issue these days, and I feel there has to be a proper consent taken beforehand before we give vaccination to our subjects. I think ACVIP has come out with a consent form, but I don't feel, I'm not still following it, but I feel that's the future. We have to take a proper consent for vaccination to protect
I think
ourselves medically.
nobody is taking consent for vaccination. Dr. Saraway?
No, we are not. We are not. We take it as a very routine procedure, and parents also uh, take it as a very routine thing. So at least we are not doing it right now.
It is, but
Impossible.
can,
It's
Doctor-
We should definitely. We should definitely.
we should definitely
Welcome, Dr.
Yeah.
Dhiren.
Sir, it's impossible to take consent. Frankly speaking, it's very difficult. But
Yeah,
you tell them wait for 15 minutes, anaphylaxis can happen.
yeah.
But if you start taking in writing, there are, in pediatric practice, patients are already reducing and they will vanish off.
Nice to see you, Dr.
Hello,
Dhiren,
sir.
after a long time.
So
Hello, sir.
definitely, I agree that keep an ampule and
Yeah.
keep in mind that कितना देना है मेरे को, because that is the problem.
Yeah,
Is when patient becomes blue in your clinic,
yeah.
the panic, the amount of panic created in any pediatrician is means you cannot match.
Yes, yes, yes.
I've seen that scenario in my clinic. Patient land up in anaphylaxis, and I was in Gangaram. Fortunately, I took him to emergency and gave epinephrine. But if it would have been an individual clinic, alone room, I can imagine where my heart was pumping like anything. It's much more difficult than managing in intensive care. Intensive care, you know that patient has come with the ailment and you can manage, you can give anything. But in a
Healthy child coming.
looking child, will land up in anaphylaxis, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Dr. Vesh, so to repeat the same question, if a patient, we know that the children are having asthma or they are having some atopic dermatitis like thing, and do we expect them to have a serious food allergy also? What is your comment? And if yes, then how we can assess beforehand that they are going to have some food allergy, and so that we become careful about it?
Yes, that's a very good question. So in case we come across a patient who is having atopic dermatitis or who is having asthma, we can say that the child is atopic. So the immune system is definitely tipped towards the Th2. So child will definitely might get an anaphylactic reaction in the future. So we have to be careful with these children. To recognize the allergen, we can perform skin prick tests. These skin prick tests are very easily available these days, and these skin prick tests can be done in under controlled settings, and we can identify if there is a particular identifiable allergen to which the child is allergic to, and we can counsel the parents and the other caregivers that we have to make sure that the child does not is not exposed to this allergen or this antigen. It might lead to an anaphylactic reaction in future. So we can counsel the parents accordingly if we get such a child in our OPD practice.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes. Sir, I told you I have never used it. I don't think I was able to procure it. I have to make it myself. Yes, I had a patient coming from Canada. He had it, but haven't seen it. It's very rare. It's a rare side. I think Dr. Dhiren sir, what is your experience, sir?
No, no, all are imported, and problem is is the expiry date. You means it's a good number. Adrenaline costs you 2 rupees, and that pen costs you so much dollars. So it's very difficult to keep. Means I've seen it once. People have bought those who are from US and patient already suffering from allergy. They do carry, but if it's not practical in India, I don't think means why these people are Indian company don't make this small thing. I still, life here is so cheap that they don't feel that anaphylaxis is major problem. It's a major problem. One anaphylaxis in pediatric clinic can kill his practice for throughout the life. That is the problem. Means it may be one in one lab, but one patient dying after injection, I think can chopper his career.
Definitely. So that's
Yeah, very
totally
nice,
right.
very correct. Very correct.
सर मैं ओपीडी में बैठा हूँ, काय को डरा रहे हो मेरे को बैठे बैठे अपनी वैक्सीन लगाई है।
अपना मास्क उतारे, मेरे को आईसीयू के पेशेंट की कॉल आती है, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं। जिसको इंजेक्शन लगाया है उसकी एक आपको ऐसा लगता है यार आपने ठीक इंजेक्शन लगाया था पहला, कुछ हो तो नहीं गया। लेट मी वेरी फ्रैंक मींस
They will start blaming you कि आपने वो इंजेक्शन लगाया, उसके बाद हुआ, उसी से हुआ।
सर
मैं बॉक्स दे देता हूं उनको, जिससे वो अपना कंपनी पढ़ लें, क्योंकि सबसे पहले उनको लगता है कि डॉक्टर ने कौन सी कंपनी का लगा दिया। तो मैंने कुछ रूल्स बनाए हैं, मैं बॉक्स उनको पकड़ा देता हूँ।
हाँ, बॉक्स
That's a good idea, sir.
और मैं ये रखता हूँ हमेशा क्लिनिक में, सामने बगल में पड़ी रहती है।
मत रख, उनको पकड़ा दे। अच्छा, एड्रेनलिन है ये, सॉरी।
हाँ, ये एड्रेनलिन है।
रिफिल होना चाहिए तो हाँ, प्रिपेयर्ड होना चाहिए। एम्पूल खोलोगे जब तक तो बहुत टाइम हो जाए।
नहीं सर, अब इसको प्रिपेयर करके कहाँ रखूंगा?
प्रिपेयर ओपीडी जनरली the practice is that starting the OPD with the preparation of adrenaline and keep it in the exam just near the examination table and where you inoculate or injection is given. So you are ready to have any. Load
करके it has to be loaded.
सोचते रहते हैं, कोई नहीं करता है।
Dr. Vash has said that we can keep it for 1 month.
Sir, we have some questions also in the chat box. Like any evidence of anaphylaxis with coloring agent or preservative used in the ultra-processed food causing allergies? Is there any evidence?
I haven't read evidence about this processed food, but definitely it can lead to anaphylaxis. Because in children who are atopic, it can lead to IG dependent degranulation and can cause anaphylaxis if we use more processed food. So that's why we say don't bahar ka khana mat khao, processed food mat khao. So that's why.
कौन कहता है?
And avoid coloring substances.
कौन कहता है? सबसे ज्यादा स्विगी चल रहा है, और वो चल रहा है कौन सा वाला दूसरा?
Zomato.
कौन कहता है नहीं सर, कौन मानता है?
Kindly elaborate about exercise-induced anaphylaxis.
Yes, ma'am. Exercise-induced anaphylaxis can be seen in certain children. There are two kinds. First is exercise-induced anaphylaxis, and second is food-dependent exercise-induced anaphylaxis. In the first kind, there are children who will, go to the gym or who will start running, and as soon as they start sweating, they will get an anaphylactic reaction. And in the second kind, when they exercise, there is no anaphylaxis. However, when suppose, if there's a cricket match, the child will have some roti or chana dal and then goes to batting. After some time, after ingestion of that food, when the child starts playing, the child might get an anaphylactic reaction. So these two have to be kept in mind. And if any such signs of anaphylaxis are seen in these playing children, they have to be assessed by an allergy specialist. So tests are done in controlled condition where the child is made to cycle and made to exercise so that you can induce that anaphylaxis in controlled conditions.
So for exercise-induced anaphylaxis, we should some drug should be given before the patient goes for exercise. As far as food is concerned, we will avoid food. Right?
Yeah, we have to, in FDEI, we can avoid food if we have identified that particular food. We can obviously avoid that particular food. For example, if you have identified chana dal, you can tell them, okay, chana dal kha ke mat jana exercise karne. But if you haven't been able to recognize any particular allergen, we can say ki please exercise se pehle you can go empty stomach. At least you have to be empty stomach for at least 4 hours before you start your batting or before you start your exercise.
Is there any rule of consumption of some drugs before, anti-allergic drug or anything before going for exercise?
Yes, ma'am. Child can be given maybe an antihistaminic before the child goes to an exercise, so this might prevent chances of an anaphylaxis before the child starts exercising.
Okay, any more comments, sir, from your side? Anyone of the panelists or Dr.
Any role of mast cell stabilizer? Role of mast cell stabilizer like Montelukast?
Yes, there is a role of mast cell stabilizer. As we have seen in the pathophysiology, this anaphylaxis is basically degranulation of the mast cells. So mast cell stabilizers will help to prevent the degranulation. So allergic children can be given mast cell stabilizers to prevent episodes of anaphylaxis.
But how long we can give? How long?
They have to be given.
They
have to be given long. They have to be given for 3 months.
Any side effects? Any side effects?
Yeah, there are certain side effects that have been noted. Neuropsychiatric side effects have been noted recently, and it is good. Some people are now preferring Bilastine. That's a new antihistaminic which has less CNS side effects. So we can move towards newer.
It can be given for a long time.
Yes, it can be given for.
It can be given for a long time.
We don't generally give beyond 3 months or 4 months. We have to keep the child in follow-up and in observation.
Any role of H2 receptor antagonist in the treatment of anaphylaxis when their response is not proper? Any?
Sir, H2 receptor antagonist, it is still under research. It's not documented to use. It is still under research.
Thank you, Dr. Hans Wesch, for such an excellent presentation.
Thank
now
you,
we will move
Thank you for
ahead.
this opportunity, ma'am.
We will move ahead, and now I would like to introduce our second speaker for today's talk, Dr. Dhiren Gupta, sir. He is a great academician, is a consultant pediatric intensivist from Sir Gangaram Hospital, Delhi. He has received Vishisht Chikitsa Ratna Award in the field of pediatric intensive care by Union Health Minister J.P. Nadda and Dr. Mahesh Sharma, Union Minister of State for Culture, on occasion of Doctors' Day on 1st July 2018. He is editor of ABC in PICU Manual. He is the chairperson and founder of Acute Care for Practicing Pediatrician module by IAP. He is the chief editor of Pediatric Intensive Care and Emergency Medicine. He is a coordinator of IAP GEM course in North India. He is an editor of PICU Protocol 2008. He is a guest. He had been a guest executive editor of Indian Pediatrics Journal 2016-2017. He had been a reviewer of Indian Pediatric Journal. He had been a co-editor of Indian Journal of Pediatric Critical Care. He has developed module on conventional chest radiology for practicing pediatricians. He is the teacher of fellows in intensive care. He has got about 44 international and national paper published in Index Journal and textbooks. more than 200 lectures in various national and international forums. Sir has lots of achievement. I think there were more than 30 pages of his achievement, which goes to his credit. Now, may I now request Dr. Dhiren Gupta, sir, to kindly give his presentation on radiology and allergic disorder. Now, I would invite Dr. Dhiren Gupta, sir, for his deliberation. Sir, please carry on.
Thank you, Dr. Seema. Sorry, I got delayed. It was too heavy rain, and I expected I will be little bit delayed, but it took me almost double the time to reach home. Friends,
you're not. Yeah.
You know, Dr. Seema actually wanted some other topic, but I was so busy with Corona. Means I can't tell you. I just refused that. I cannot prepare, new topic. And you won't imagine, I couldn't open this topic. I just opened this topic around 10 minutes back, and it was prepared a year back. So means unfortunately too busy with Corona. But anyway, what Dr. Hans has told about us, told about the allergy and anaphylaxis, and the same way nowadays our practice is either vaccination or allergy. Infection over the time either are not there or is consumed by Corona. Means Corona has suppressed all the infection, including dengue. Nothing is able to pop up their head above anything. Fine. So we pediatricians are mostly jobless. Means there's hardly any time that you can see that can be manifested as number of webinars being conducted by DIAP, and most of them are pediatricians because they are sitting at home, and or even if the patients are there are very few. Let's face this reality. Now, aim in this presentation is very clear. I'm going to talk about sinusitis. What radiology talks about sinusitis, and radiologists have also got the same eyes which we have. So we should not refrain from reading these X-rays, or whether it's sinusitis, whether it's adenoids, whether it's a chest X-ray, if the patient is having noisy respiration. So my second aim is about adenoid. We get normally adenoidal hypertrophy on X-ray. We look for the white paper that carries a report. If report is not there, we feel little bit embarrassed. We feel okay. Means we always guess it may be mild, it may be moderate. So we need to know how to read adenoidal hypertrophy, and something about wheezy child. In a wheezy child, in a noisy respiration child, what we need to see on an X-ray or any other radiological, you can say, study we can go through. Now let's start with the sinusitis. We all know that there is acute sinusitis, subacute sinusitis, chronic sinusitis. In acute sinusitis, you don't need radiology. Okay. Sinusitis, we all know it's the inflammation of mucosal lining and paranasal sinus. Acute sinusitis lasts less than 1 month. And chronic sinusitis, a patient who is who is having a cough during nights, immediately after sleeping, they get cough. So most of these patients actually having postnasal drip secondary to sinusitis. Fine, that is a missed thing. I'm telling you, I'm giving you one hint, which a pulmonologist, you send the patient to pulmonologist, and what he do, other than the chest, looks for the sinus. And there he get sorry, Dr. Satyan, I'm just giving the hint to everybody. So they just focus on the sinus and they find the clue. Why this patient's chest is not improving? There is no problem with the chest. It's a problem with the sinus. Okay, and problem with the adenoid. In 90% of the patient where chest is not improving, it is the sinus or adenoid that should be taken care. Okay, to diagnose that, clinical sense is sufficient, but at times you need to take care of radiology. When we talk about radiology and sinus, people will say, okay, only CT scan. No. In those sensitivity of plain radiography is less to diagnose sinusitis, but my experience says 80% of the sinusitis you can well view on plain X-ray. Okay. Now, what type of X-ray we need? We just need one view, that is Waters view. Just Waters view we require. This we call it occipitomental view. This is an occipitobventral view. This is a Waters view Only one view we are going to study here. So if we try to look at the various sinuses, let's try to define the sinuses. The most important, as I told you, is the maxillary sinus. This is the most important one. This is the most important one. Okay. And if you look at this one is the most important one. This one we understand is an orbit. These are maxillary sinus, frontal sinus. This is an orbit. And here you will find nasal and ethmoid air sinus. This is very difficult to view on plain X-ray. So we are going to focus on only maxillary sinus. If some patient is carrying the lateral view, this is your maxillary sinus on lateral view. This is, we all know, this is a sphenoid sinus, a sphenoid bone, and this will be the sphenoid sinuses, and here it will be ethmoid sinus. Again, today our aim is the maxillary sinus. This sinus we are going to talk. Now, we need to view the normal sinus along with abnormal. Only then, we are not radiologists, so we need to know what is normal. This is a abnormal sinus. Look, it's totally white. This one is normal maxillary sinus, and this is your orbit. If I compare A with the B, it's very obvious. This sinus is full. So very likely this may be fluid, or very likely it may be just mucous membrane that's thickened. Look at the history. If it is an acute history, patient is having high-grade fever, patient is having a lot of nasal discharge, it must be acute sinusitis. If patient is having signs of chest, postnasal drip, in night he wakes up, coughs, and it's a chronic history, it must be your mucosal membrane thickening. Okay. Now, in many of our patients, you may get fluid level. What is this fluid level? As I told you, this looks little bit thickened membrane. This is not absolutely normal. But A, if I compare with the B, this is the fluid level. When we talk about fluid level, meniscus is concave. So this one is your air fluid level. Okay. And look at the second one. If A is normal, B is abnormal, but instead of concave, this is little bit convex and irregular. So this must be polyp. Okay. So this way we differentiate the fluid level. This one is a typical fluid level, and if it is concavity upward like this is a polyp. So you can differentiate polyp, and we know that in a patient with the allergic sinusitis or asthma, there can be polyp. Now look at A and B. This is your maxillary sinus, B1 and A1. What is this one? And this must be mucosal thickening. Again, this is absolutely normal. So some people define more than 1, 2 millimeter, 4 millimeter, forget that. Whenever you find this is an abnormal whitish projections from the margins, so compare it with the normal one, other sinus. If both sinus can be affected in almost 50%, so it must be abnormal, means like this one is also mucosal thickening. So look at the compare with the normal one. So this must be mucosal thickening. Always compare clinically. So as I told you, when I talk about plain radiography, in acute sinusitis, you don't need acute radiography, plain radiography, but in many of the patients, you may be able to find air fluid level. In these patients, you need to give antibiotic also. Mucosal thickening is most common in 90% of sinusitis, though it is non-specific, but friends, it helps. Radiologists will always say, why are you wasting it? But in clinical practice, this X-ray, lot of time it helps in little bit bigger child, more than 5 to 6 year old child, because up to 3 years sinuses are not very clear. Air fluid level may be found in 60% of the patient. As I told you, age 3 and younger, the sinuses are not pneumatized, so they are not major help. But bigger kids, definitely it is of great help. And again, when I talk about that when it should be done, suppose patient is not improving on antibiotic and you're thinking that there's a persistence of symptoms, this conventional radiography may help, then only one view, that is a water view, is sufficient. Now regarding CT, I'm not giving you the CT scan because there were many slides. I thought that that is unnecessary waste. That is the investigation of choice when we are thinking of chronic sinus. But because a patient is just suffering from chest problem, patient is having wheezing problem, to get an CT scan for a sinus, I think that this is unnecessary radiation exposure. Okay, get an X-ray, start treatment, and 99% doesn't need CT scan, because if patient improves clinically, radiologically on plain X-ray, which you cost you 500 rupees or 300 rupees, if you're able to make a diagnosis, why to go for the CT scan? He came for the chest, he has some nasal problem, that is allergic child. So need not to waste money in the CT scan. Even if in X-ray you don't get this finding, empirically treat for sinusitis, especially chronic sinusitis and nasal allergy, patient will get better. You don't need CT scan in most of the patients, especially I'm talking about allergic sinusitis. Now we know that CT scan should not be done in most of the patient, but again, if you have done, always remember there are a lot of false positive cases. No CT scan, if done for sinusitis, won't say that there is no sinusitis. Always you will find there is a minor sinusitis in the patient. So it has got false positive problem. Now, when the CT scan or MRI should done, especially if you are thinking of some intracranial complications. If you are thinking of intracranial complications, one should go for MRI. Okay, because we know that a lot of sinuses and are around, and it's a danger area of face. So it's a danger area. So MRI is indicated if you're thinking of intracranial complication and you're thinking of extension of infection, and there could be sagittal venous sinus thrombosis. So these problems can occur in chronic lung infection. So then you should order an MRI rather than CT scan. Regarding ultrasound is definitely, I'm obsessed with ultrasound. So I started doing ultrasonography for maxillary sinus. Still I'm learning, but it is said that if machine is good, penetration, more than penetration, resolution is good, choose an probe. That should be linear probe. Okay, put up over the maxillary sinus, and you may be able to see some form of sinusitis. Look at this, a haziness, and this is a normal sinus. So you may be able, your ultrasonologist may be able to differentiate sinusitis from the normal sinuses, but they also need practice. Now we come to adenoid. Adenoid is pretty common in pediatric age group, especially after 6 months to 8 months, they start growing, and up to 4 years to 6 years, it's a peak. Let's try to learn the lateral view and try to learn the landmarks. So I approach from the center. Look at the A1, and start approaching from the nose. The posterior indentation, this is your adenoid. Okay, this is your sphenoid bone, and this is your palate. Try to mark out these two landmarks. This one is your palate. This is your adenoid. Okay. Then you move little bit down. These are the earrings. This is retropharyngeal space. The retropharyngeal space diameter should not be more than 2 vertebral bodies kept here. It should not be more than 2 vertebral bodies. Bodies means this one, not this one. The body means this smaller one. This body, if you keep 2 bodies, and your retropharyngeal space should not bulge beyond that. So that is abnormal. This one is your, this is a step sign, this is a step, this is a normal. Here the esophagus starts, then this is your retrotracheal space. Okay, this is your trachea. And if you carefully try to view, this is your epiglottis. Look at this one is a Photoshop. This is your epiglottis. And you should be able to view this one, airy epiglottic fold. This is airy epiglottic fold. Look at known Photoshop. Try to visualize. I'll try to enlarge it. This one is your airy epiglottic fold. I'll try to enlarge it. Look at If it is visible, this is airy epiglottic fold. In many of the patients, you may be able to view the vocal fold. So it is just your mind if knows a lot, so you can visualize. If you don't know that what has to be visualized, you will be a little bit scared looking at the film. So again, start from the nose. This is an adenoid. This is your soft palate. This is your epiglottis. This one is your epiglottis. This is retropharyngeal space. This is airy epiglottic fold. This is vocal cord, and this is trachea. Now let's take some cases and look at how it is going to helpful. What is abnormal adenoids and what is normal adenoid? What we need to do, look at this soft palate. This is your posterior indentation of that airway. We call it adenoids. Okay. Now look at the distance between the two. Okay. Suppose this white is A, distance between the two is B. So when we call it is abnormal, when you find the distance, that is the airway size is smaller than the palate size, that is a soft palate size, we call it abnormal. More the smaller than the palate, we call it more the abnormal. So 50% is, we call it, is a normal space. Less than 50% is abnormal. Again, it has to correlate with the clinical presentation of the patient, and no along radiology should not be treated. Now look at this patient, a 4-year-old child, pre-bronchoscopy, means you can say decannulation. This patient had tracheostomy. Pre-decannulation, we do bronchoscopy. We try to put in bronchoscope in the nose and we couldn't enter the pharynx. Okay, that was the story. Patient was carrying this X-ray and this lateral view X-ray, and we couldn't make where is adenoid. I couldn't make where is adenoid. Approach from the nose, and here is nothing, it's a white. So what has happened? This is not a soft tissue. This is a hard tissue film. It has to be soft tissue film. Because of hard tissue, what we are viewing is a jaw. So we send the patient back to the radiology department and conveyed them that we want soft tissue film. Now look at the same patient within an hour. Look at. Now you can make soft palate. Now you can make adenoids, and there is hardly any space between adenoid and, look at this one. There is hardly any space between adenoid and your soft palate. Need not to calculate the space. It is much lesser than the size of soft palate. If this is soft palate, and even one line I am drawing, nothing I can pass. Okay, so how the air is going to pass and how my bronchoscope is going to pass. So lesson we learned, always write soft tissue film. Always write X-ray lateral view for adenoid. Then they will give you soft tissue film. Okay. So some facts we need to know about the adenoids. Though they are present at the birth, but they are invisible till 3 to 6 months. I've seen a lot of adenoids at 7 months of age also. And they can grow until 6 years and they involute during adulthood. If you do not find any adenoidal tissue at the age of 6 months, suspect immunodeficiency. So now we leave aside the adenoid and sinuses. Now we move to the plain radiography and a CT scan in a patient where there are problem of allergy. Not an uncommon patient with an asthma who is not getting better, having fever every day, every second day, every week, and his asthma is not getting better. And you do an X-ray, you find some shadows here, and after a week or 10 days, you again get a shadow increasing, and after 2-3 weeks, you start looking at those shadows has gone away, but some residual shadows are there. So whenever you find a fleeting, transient pulmonary fleeting infiltrates in a patient on whom we are treating an asthma, you will think as ABPA. Okay? That is allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis. What are findings, though they are not very classical, but they come late. They are a little bit classical, but they come late. That is like toothpaste appearance. This is a typical toothpaste appearance. Okay. And if it would have been Indian, scientists, he might have called it as a dung, like a gobar appearance. So it all depends where you were and who you were the pioneer when you diagnose these type of conditions. So it has been called as a toothpaste appearance. And again, another appearance that we call it finger in glove sign. That is a CT appearance of whitish airways. This is a whitish airway, and you can see this is a finger in glove. So this looks like a finger in glove. So it has been described in ABPA. What other classical views on an X-ray on the CT scan? Classical is your central and upper lobe secular bronchiectasis involving segmental and subsegmental bronchi. That is a classical of ABPA. Okay? We'll describe what are the types of bronchiectasis in later on. If patient is having failure to thrive, repeated problem, you think of cystic fibrosis. In these patients, classically, there is a hyperinflation, and you will find upper lobe bronchiectasis. So otherwise, it is a middle lobe and central bronchiectasis that is classical, secondary to asthma. But if it is a cystic fibrosis, it is an upper lobe involvement. But if it is a primary ciliary dyskinesia, then the lower lobe bronchiectasis that predominates. Okay, and also you will find airway impaction. This is a typical airway impaction. I'll enlarge it. I'll show you later what I mean to say airway impaction. This is a typical airway impaction. Okay, I'll try to describe it so that you can diagnose. Now let's try to visualize the bronchiectasis and airway impaction, which I talked. When we talk about airway dilatation, that is known as bronchodilation, and in technical term, it is a bronchiectasis. How you define bronchiectasis? Look at the airways. I'm talking about A. This is, if I enlarge it, this has got a typical signet ring sign. So what is signet ring? This is a typical signet ring sign, and this is a diamond or pearl, and this is a ring. So how you describe bronchiectasis? I'm talking about very early bronchiectasis. Early bronchiectasis is a signet ring sign. Normally in a CT scan, the airway looks like this is in bronchus, blackish, and this is your pulmonary artery. This is your pulmonary artery. The size of pulmonary artery and bronchi is 1:1. If you find bronchi size more than your pulmonary artery, even if it is more than 1, it is not 1:1. Whenever you find more than 1 space, more than 1.5, we call it bronchi is enlarged. Or if you find in any other case where asthma is not a feature, pulmonary artery is more than the bronchi, especially more than 1.5 times the bronchi, we call it pulmonary artery congestion, like a pulmonary edema. So what is abnormal? If this is normal, this is abnormal. Here, look at the bronchi. This is 10 times enlarged than the pulmonary artery. So this is known as signet ring sign. So whenever on CT scan you find size of pulmonary artery is smaller than your bronchi, or bronchi is much more larger than your pulmonary artery, you call it abnormal. Now, what are various type of bronchiectasis? This one is normal. A is abnormal. B is this V is cylindrical type. Cylindrical. This is a cylindrical bronchiectasis. There is a loss of tapering. This is a typical tapering of airway. If you do not find typical tapering of the airway, you call it bronchiectasis. They are enlarged and dilated. This is like a varicose vein, is C1. This is a typical varicose style of bronchiectasis. And the most common is the cystic, and most serious form is the cystic one. These are the typical cystic bronchiectasis. So these are various forms of bronchiectasis, which we can visualize on CT scan, and even these are visualized on X-ray also. Now, I was talking about inflammation of the airway. If there's too much inflammation of the airway, there will be mucus infection, and this mucus infection will be white, more white. HU unit will be more, Horn's unit will be much more in the impacted mucus. That is very characteristic of your ABPA. Okay, so normally if I take this as a wall of the bronchi, the size of the wall, the thickness of the wall should not be more than 10 to 20% of the lumen. This is a lumen. So it should not be more than 10 to 20% of the lumen. But if you find it is thickened, this one is a thickened, B is a thickened, and A is non-thickened. So we call it, this is more than 10 to 20% is abnormal. If you find thickening of the wall, okay. Another thing is the airway infection. In airway infection, in an axial view, this is a typical whitish appearance. We call it airways impacted with the mucus, and this, as I told you, is a classical of ABPA. Now we come to obliterative bronchi, and this we have seen in like a patient of bronchiolitis who is not improving. So patient suffered from bronchiolitis like adenovirus. They are not improving, and every 15 days, every 10 days, child is having cough, and bronchiolitis is getting prolonged. Get an CT scan, you may find typical feature of obliterative bronchiolitis. What are typical features of obliterative bronchiolitis? If this is abnormal, look at this part of the CT scan, and now look at this part of CT scan. You will find there's a attenuation of vascular marking. What are the vascular marking? This one is, you can see the whitish, this is the white. These are the vascular marking. And at this part B, there is less vascular marking. So what is happening? There's a attenuation of vascular marking, and there's a hyperinflation. Hyperinflation and attenuation of vascular marking. These are two characteristic features of obliterative bronchiolitis. Wherever there is a hyperinflation, there will be attenuation of vascular marking, and there may be reticulonodular marking in the same patient where we are suspecting obliterative bronchiolitis. So CT scan, if you find combination of air trapping and oligemia, this combination gives you mosaic attenuation pattern. So this looks like a mosaic attenuation pattern. Okay, this is a characteristic of obliterative bronchiolitis. Something different is known as something different disease, which we don't find in pediatric age group, but in many adolescents, you may find hypersensitive pneumonitis. In hypersensitive pneumonitis, is very difficult to define, but it looks like a typical miliary shadows. And what you will be able to visualize is ground glass opacity, a central ground glass opacity. Again on X-ray is difficult. I'll show you CT scan in the next slide. That is on the CT scan, but numerous small opacity throughout the lung, especially sparing the apices and the bases. It is a center, and you may suspect hypersensitive pneumonitis. I remember a patient came from Jabalpur with this type of CT scan. An adult pulmonologist diagnosed it as a hypersensitive pneumonitis, and ultimately it came out to be just tuberculosis and nodules. So there at times there can be various differential diagnoses, but again look at the history of the patient. And an adolescent, poorly controlled asthma or poorly controlled respiratory symptoms, and look for the surroundings where he lives. If you find lot of coal mining, lot of dust is there, there are, you can say, with droppings, and there is history of, you can say, inhalation of this type of problem. And if you find homogeneous ground glass opacity, bilateral symmetrical, you think of hypersensitivity, pneumonitis. Today we know that ground glassing is very famous and popular. You will find ground glassing in the periphery, in the adjacent to the pleura. That ground glassing is much more different from this hypersensitive pneumonitis. Now, what is ground glassing? Because you are going to see a lot of CT scan by your send by your relatives. That I'm sending you the CT scan, and look, is it abnormal? Look at what is ground glassing. Ground glassing is a glass which has got some blurriness. Okay, that we call it ground glassing. Okay, now imagine I show you the previous one. This is an vascular marking. This one is your vascular marking. These are your vascular marking. This is your typical vascular marking. This one, this one, this one, this one. And if whiteness of this area is that much that it obscure these vascular marking, we call it consolidation or infiltration. If you are able to do these vascular markings beneath that whiteness or haziness, it means it is a partial consolidation. So what is your ground glass hazy appearance? It's nothing. It's a non-suppurative inflammation. It's a non-suppurative consolidation. Consolidation means it's a bacterial or tumor that has obliterated the whiteness imparted by your vascular structure. But if you are able to view the vascular structure, it's a semi-transparent sort of thing. We call it ground glass hazy. Hazy, it is a hazy. It is not a oblique, or you can say totally white, which is obscuring the vessels. We differentiate between the two. So that is ground glassing. If any patient of corona infection, if you find whiteness and there is no ground glassing, it means we have reached stage 2. That is a pretty bad stage. If you find crazy pavement or fibrosis, it means we have reached stage 3 and 4. Nothing can happen to this patient. It's going to be difficult patient. So it all is a level of suppuration, level of whiteness, which gives an idea how bad is the patient. Now, regarding radiology of the noisy patient, in a patient who is having noisy, you think of allergic disorder, you think of bronchiolitis, you think of asthma, look for an X-ray. If you are ordering an X-ray, normally we rule out any other comorbidity, any other problem, only then we get an X-ray. But if you get an X-ray, if you're thinking of hyperinflation, always get a lateral view. Look at the frontal view, there is no flattening of the diaphragm, but if you look at the lateral view of the same patient, especially in the infant, lateral view is more sensitive to diagnose hyperinflation, but we can view the straightening of the diaphragm and also look at the retrosternal view. This is the retrosternal view. At least 1/3 of the heart should touch this retrosternal view. And if everything is obliterated by the air that is black, we call it hyperinflation. That is a simple definition on lateral view chest X-ray. Left lateral view is the best view. Now, as I told you, this is a patient of asthma. My friend sent me an X-ray. Sir, what is happening? What is this black shadow here? And you told us in some of the webinar that retropharyngeal area, if this become wide, this become enlarged more than the C3 or C5 body, this is abnormal. What is this black structure? So what is this black structure? Actually, this is the normal retropharyngeal space. Actually, this was a patient of asthma. Then patient had a lot of subcutaneous emphysema. So emphysema can enter the retropharyngeal area also. So this air entered the retropharyngeal area and it produced this blackness and radiolucency, we call it. This is a patient of laryngomalacia and look at the larynx. Normally, laryngomalacia, you don't do bronchoscopy or laryngoscopy unless you find failure to thrive, acute life-threatening event is there, patient is not able to swallow, or if there is a biphasic stridor. This is a patient of epiglottitis. If this is normal epiglottis and this is a typical thumb-like, this is a typical thumb-like appearance, and we call it abnormal epiglottis, and this is abnormal aryepiglottic fold on the radiology. Though in India it's uncommon, but it's not that uncommon. We normally get many patients of epiglottitis, maybe milder epiglottitis, but you don't do bronchoscopy, that's why you're not able to prove. In X-rays you may get. Now look at another child who presented with the typical, there is no history of upper airway obstruction, but this X-ray was reported as a thickened epiglottis. Look at this is an epiglottis, this is a typical epiglottis. These are the two earrings, and this is your retropharyngeal space, and also your aryepiglottic fold is also broadened. So you always think of, okay, patient history is not matching. Is it really epiglottitis? So what we need to know, always remember, when we talk about epiglottitis, can you see the screen? One more screen has appeared. Can you see that this moving structure? No. Dr. Satyan, can you see the larynx and trachea in one more image? I am okay. So anyway,
See, sir.
No, it is not open, not visible.
Okay. So I leave it. So always remember, this is a rotated film. Whenever you find a rotated film, your epiglottis will thicken. So that is a problem. So you need to know whether my film is rotated or not. So this, fortunately, this child was wearing earrings, so you can see earrings are not overlapping. But otherwise, you can see the your external, you can say, acoustic canal. So if you do not find two acoustic canal, it means there is no overlapping. So always look for the overlapping in the patient. Now, this was the patient of tracheomalacia. Look at the plain X-ray patient was carrying. It was from Gwalior. Look at, you cannot make out the trachea. Okay. In fluoroscopy, you may be able to see this type of picture, but in if you're fortunate, even in plain X-ray can give you an idea that patient trachea is collapsed. And lateral view, you look at the trachea. If this is a normal trachea, and look at this is a collapsed trachea. So and patient history is matching. So you can always think of disease like this, but bronchoscopy view or bronchoscopy is the best way to rule out tracheomalacia. Fluoroscopy carries lot of radiation, so that is not indicated. Now look at this child, 1.5-year-old with cough and suspected foreign body. Though X-ray showed right side little bit, you can say, straightening of diaphragm, left side okay. There was a poor air entry on the right side, but X-ray is not classical of foreign body. So people say that, okay, get an inspirative film and expirative film, and 1.5-year-old child, you cannot have inspirative film and expirative film. So what you can do, you take a right decubitus view. Suppose this is, you're thinking of foreign body in the right side, you ask your radiographer to make the patient right side lower down and take an X-ray. Normally, it should not a persistent hyperinflation on the right side. Normally, what should happen? The right side should get collapsed. So right side, if slightly collapses during right decubitus lateral view or frontal view, then it is normal. But if there's a right persistent hyperinflation, probably, and with air entry poor, likely there must be foreign body. So this is a desi way, if you don't have bronchoscopy, to prove it, there's a problem. Swelling dysfunction is not very uncommon. Reflux is not very uncommon. We get lot of patients with reflux. Very difficult to prove this one entity. At times we give just a proton pump inhibitor to these patients, try to look at the clinical improvement, but swelling dysfunction is difficult to prove. Now, this is something known as video fluoroscopic swallow study. Most of the radiographers just take a stat view while giving some dye. But you can ask, there is a screen, you can just take a video of that screen. And what we do, we take a video. They store this video for few, you can say, days, and you can just review these videos. You ask your patient to ingest some milk with some dye like gastrografin or your barium, and look at whether it is getting spilled in the lungs or not. Okay, in this patient it looks okay. Now the second one, now view this B, and here you will find patient is taking the dye, and this dye is getting not only in the esophagus but actually in the trachea. So this dye is getting spilled into the trachea. So you can actually visualize from where this swallowing dysfunction is happening and from where this patient is having aspiration. Is it from below above, that is from stomach, or directly while feeding patient is aspiring? Okay, so these type of differential diagnosis you can make on these type of video films. Another thing which we do is FEES, that is fiber optic endoscopic evaluation. What we do, we put in a bronchoscope in the nose, in the nasopharynx, and baby is in mother lap, and we ask mother to give some dye, means milk with the dye like methylene blue, and we look at the area where the epiglottis glottis opening is there, and this must be area for the esophagus, and look at the dye whether it is entering inside the epiglottis or glottis, or there is no spillage. If there is no spillage, it is just entering inside or some part is getting spilled into the trachea, we call it, there is a positive FEES. Okay, these are the ways. Again, these are not very sensitive because you are going to do FEES for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and patient may not aspirate at that time. So these are poorly sensitive methods, but they are good methods. Now comes this is a patient repeated cough.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. Sir, we have to finish it off.
Okay, I think this may be the last one. I think I can finish one. Yeah, this will be the last one. This is a 1-year-old child with again lot of inspiratory problem, with lot of cough, and on lateral view, look at a very small trachea. So this was a complete tracheal rings. And in these type of patient, if you get an gastrographin, you may get external compression because of the vascular ring. So these are not an uncommon, and this is a noisy respiration where we found that patient had actually vocal cord dysfunction, and you can place ultrasound also. So we placed ultrasound on the neck, and we were able to see the vocal cords are moving well, and so we could find that probably it is a vocal cord dysfunction. So to conclude my presentation, always remember presence of persistent cough, not intermittent cough, biphasic stridor, failure to thrive, clubbing, monophasic wheeze is there, poor response to bronchodilator indicate that in an apparently allergic child, we should go for some other investigation. Okay, the type of presentation will guide you what should be the another investigation, and adenoidal hypertrophy or sinusitis is an important, you can say, comorbidities in this patient. We should know how to read the radiology. And the most important point, discuss radiology with the radiologist and give feedback to them. That is the most important thing which I have learned by practice. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir, for the excellent presentation you have given. Now, I would request our panelists to please comment upon and just put the questions if there are any.
Excellent talk, Dr. Dhiren, as always. It is just a mesmerizing talk, and you work very hard with your presentation and make people understand so easy. I know once you told me that you have purchased a software of lakhs of rupees for such type of animation. You used to make slides. That's a wonderful experience listening your. It is always a experience listening your talk. So nice talk as always. Just a piece of question, Dr. Dhiren. As you told that adenoids, the lateral view and soft tissue nasopharynx, what is the importance of AN ratio? It is said that AN ratio of more than 8 is very, very compatible with adenoid hypertrophy.
There are 3 ways to diagnose the adenoidal hypertrophy on X-ray. I told you just one way. There are other ways also, but previously I used to calculate AN ratio, but I found that this way is the best way, and when you are in clinic, you don't have time to put in the marks, but this is such an apparent thing. So in some day I will explain because time is less, but AN ratio is another way.
Okay, because we are writing request to radiologist, please comment on AN ratio. No radiologist give confirmation regarding the AN ratio.
If you, I mean to say, okay, you continue with the question. I'll show you the airway AN ratio also.
Yeah.
I think. we can continue with the question answers. Until meantime, I'll show AN ratio, how you calculate the AN ratio.
Regarding the bronchiectasis, we are still waiting for years to see a case of bronchiectasis. You being in a referral, working in a tertiary hospital, I don't know what are the experience of other pediatrician regarding for bronchiectasis in our office practice.
Sir, you are neurologist now. You get railroad appearance in the brain. So railroad appearance in the lung, if you try, you will get it. Sir, this is AN ratio. What you do, this is a soft palate, this is hard palate. Junction of soft palate and hard palate, and this is basosphenoid. Okay, so you draw a line. This one. This is your nasopharyngeal diameter, and the maximum outpouching is the adenoidal diameter. So A divided by N. So if adenoid is occupying more than 50% of the nasopharynx, that is abnormal. This is AN ratio. More than 75%, if adenoid is occupying the nasal area, this is nasopharynx area, that is abnormal. So AN ratio is also very simple. But as I told you, means this I found is very simple.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was nice explanation.
Satyan कहाँ गया?
Satyan practice कर रहा है sir.
Yeah, any other comments from our Dr. Ashwini sir, Dr. Sarabhai sir, Dr. Satyan?
Actually,
Excellent talk, sir. And he reminded me about our teacher in Teachers Day. Dr. Saxena teaches in the radiology classes. Similarly, I am remembering my teacher. Excellent talk, and nothing better than that we can expect.
Sir, my teacher is also Dr. K.K. Saxena. He is a radiologist. He is a conventional radiologist. He doesn't do CT/MRI. Rarely you will find a conventional radiologist who just focuses on X-ray. When he look at the X-ray, he used to tell on CT scan what extra information you will get. 80% it matches.
Dr. Verma may remember that he told the clinical feature on seeing the X-ray.
He was a gem person. Professor J.S. Saxena was our head of the department radiology, and he was so interested in teaching. Even in the corridor, if you take the X-ray, he started teaching like anything. He was absolutely great person. Very simple, down to earth.
Yeah, Thakur sir, good evening. Thakur sir is my senior from Gwalior.
sir, actually,
Sir. Sir, आप मेरे teacher हो sir.
Actually, Dr. Dhiren, the time is very short because I wanted to ask you that there are many confusing clinical conditions.
Sir.
For example, SP, that is simple pulmonary eosinophilia, or acute eosinophilic pneumonia, or chronic eosinophilic pneumonia, idiopathic hyper eosinophilic syndrome, or ABPA you talked about, or BG, that is bronchocentric granulomatosis. Now, is it essential to differentiate between these conditions clinically and radiologically? Does it make any difference in the line of management of various conditions?
Management is same most of the time.
Right. This is what I wanted to ask.
All these academic exercises only to be done if you are trapped.
Right.
It means 99% of the time we don't need radiology, we don't need invasive tests. Right. We know that this is an aspiration, this is reflux. Fine. So you have to start treating them empirically. And in 1% of the patient, you should know, okay, ये हो सकता है तो मैं ये वाला test करा सकता हूँ. I mean, these things are available.
Exactly.
These things are available, and doesn't mean technology is with you. You start doing these things in every patient.
This is what I wanted to listen from your mouth. Thank you.
Wrong. That is not a justice to the patient. Even if you are sitting in Gangaram, doesn't mean you will start getting CT scan. Doesn't mean that you will start doing bronchoscopy in all the patient of laryngomalacia.
Now to
Right,
wind
sir.
up, if there are no more questions, then I would like to wind up the session.
Sure.
I would like to thank Dr. Dhiren Gupta sir and Dr. Hans for such a wonderful deliberation full of knowledge. And Dr. Dhiren Gupta sir's teaching is wonderful. I was just amazed while he was
Absolutely.
telling sinusitis, sinuses radiologically and clinically he was trying to correlate. Very important anatomically, X-ray wise, we mostly miss these X-ray neck, lateral view and all. We have interpreted it so sharply, sir. I am really very happy. It was a very nice session for us to learn lots of things, especially. See, X-ray just we have learned lots and lots. But as far as X-ray sinuses and X-ray neck is concerned, this talk was really wonderful. I appreciate the talk, sir. And I also, Dr. Hans has given such a nice deliberation on anaphylaxis, covering all aspects of anaphylaxis. It was really wonderful. So on behalf of Durg Pillai Academy of Pediatrics, I would like to thank our speaker and our delegate and panelist, Dr. Anup Verma sir, Dr. Sarabhai sir, Dr. Ashwini sir, Dr. Satyen, of course, our president,